Bonjour French students, bienvenue au vidéo 5 du chapitre 6. And in this video we will be talking about les verbes sortir, partir, et dormir, and we're going to be kind of applying those, looking at how they're used to talk about somebody's day or the different activities that they do during the day. Okay, so this just basically shows you the conjugations of the three verbs. They actually have a really similar pattern. So notice that as you look across the conjugation chart, je sors, je pars, je dors. Oh, je sors and je dors look exactly the same, right? So the endings of these verbs are really almost identical. Oh, it's je sors, tu sors, il, elle, on sort, nous sortons, vous sortez, il, elle sortent. And if you're looking at passé composé, that would be je suis sorti. Of course, le e, that's there to indicate a feminine agreement. And je sortais, meaning I used to go out. So je suis sorti is more like I went out at one moment, like I just walked out the door. So it's always good to keep that difference between passé composé and imparfait in your mind. Okay, we see the same pattern with partir. It's the same endings. So we have par, which is the root, and we add those different endings like the SST and then the ton, te, and ton. Alors, je pars, tu pars, il, elle, on part, nous partons, vous partez, il, elle partent. Okay, again, we see the same pattern with passé composé and imparfait. Je suis parti, je partais, and we're going to talk in a minute about what the difference in meaning is between sortir and partir. And you can kind of get a hint of that here. Next to sortir, it says to go out. Partir is to leave. So the sense is just a little bit different. We'll get into that in just a little bit. And of course, dormir is to sleep, and the pattern of conjugation is almost identical. But you see, there is a difference in the conjugations of passé composé in all three of these. It's je suis sorti, je suis parti, et finalement, j'ai dormi. Okay, so why is it that we see je suis for sortir and partir, but not for dormir? Now, sortir and partir, if you remember a little bit earlier in our course, I posted in, I believe it was the previous chapter folder, an image of la maison d'être, so the house of to be. And that house kind of gives you a summary of all the different verbs that are conjugated with être. And they're very often verbs of coming and going, verbs of motion. So sortir and partir obviously have something to do with movement, with motion, with coming and going. So they happen to be part of that group of verbs that gets conjugated with être. Dormir is one of the majority of verbs that gets conjugated with avoir. So it is j'ai dormi. Notice also there is no little e in parentheses next to dormi because there is no gender agreement required when you're doing a passé composé with avoir. All right, moving on. Okay, so this talks a little bit about the different meanings of these three verbs. So of course, sortir can mean to go out, like going out with friends, maybe to go in and out of a building, similar to, or I mean opposite in meaning of entrer. So je suis entré, je suis sorti, like I entered or I came in and then I left. So using passé composé to say that. Okay, je suis sorti de l'appartement, so we use de after sortir. Je suis sorti de l'appartement en pyjama. Uh-oh, this is not really good to go out of your apartment in your pajamas. Pour aller chercher le journal. So this person left their apartment in their pajamas to go and look for the newspaper. Partir is a little bit different. It means to leave also, but the sense is to go away from a place. Okay, the opposite of arriver. So we might use it in expressions like partir en weekend, partir en vacances, partir en voyage. And I think the sense with all of these expressions is that you're going to be leaving for an extended time. You're going to be gone for a weekend, for maybe a whole week of vacation, or maybe taking a long trip somewhere. And again, here you use a couple of prepositions. So to name the place that you're leaving, it would be partir de. Je vais partir de New York pour aller à Paris. So I'm going to leave from New York to go to Paris. To say where you're leaving for, partir pour. So je vais partir pour Paris. I'm going to leave for Paris. Demain, maybe tomorrow. Okay, and there's an example sentence here that gives another example of this. So, il part en vacances aujourd'hui. He's leaving for vacation today. Il est parti de son bureau. So he left his office. He's leaving from this place. À 3 heures et il est parti pour l'aéroport vers 5 heures. So he left from his office at 3 o'clock and he left for the airport at about 5 o'clock. Okay, so a couple of differences in meaning there between sortir and partir, and a couple of different ways that you can use these depending on the preposition that comes after the verb. And this is the same thing we have in English. In English, depending on the preposition that comes after a certain verb, the meaning can change drastically. One example I often use teaching students who are learning English would be to look up to somebody and to look down on somebody. In that case, we have two prepositions after the verb look. To look up to somebody means something very different from looking down on somebody. Or even if you said to look down versus look down on. So to look down is just simply to physically look down to the ground. Look down on conveys an attitude, a feeling. So we can see even in French too that the use of a different preposition changes the meaning of the verb. So partir de, it's to leave from a place. Partir pour is to go to that place or leaving for that place. Okay, so we can see how this works when we look at the progression of activities in somebody's day. Okay, so this is labeled une sortie, so it's kind of like a going out. Okay, Cathy parle de la dernière fois qu'elle a dîné avec des amis. So she's talking about the last time she had dinner with her friends. Et vous, la dernière fois que vous êtes sorti avec des amis, comment était la soirée? So now she's kind of turning it over to you, or the slide is turning it over to you. The last time that you went out with friends, what was the evening like? Notice we have that agreement with vous êtes sortis. Sortir is conjugated with être, so we have to use the form that goes with vous here. And depending on who the slide is talking to, if the slide is talking to me, they should include the E there. If the slide is talking to a male person, they would leave the E off. Okay, and a really important question right here that introduces all these situations. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? So this whole first part right here, even though there's a lot of letters, is just pronounced qu'est-ce. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? What happened? It's a lot of words for just to say what happened, but that is one fundamental question that you would definitely find useful in French conversations. Okay, so notice in these situations, in these different pictures, that the speaker, Cathy, she is using both passé composé and imparfait. And this is an important thing to recognize because the meaning or the reason for using one or the other, there basically is an important reason, a grammatical reason. Okay, quand j'ai quitté l'appartement, il pleuvait. So when I left the apartment, so quitter is another way of saying to leave or go out, kind of like sortir. So quand j'ai quitté happened in one moment. She walked out the door and that event was finished. And that's why she's using passé composé. Okay, il pleuvait. Here we have imparfait, which means that this was something that was going on for a while in the past. So it doesn't just rain for an instant. It rains over a period of time. So using those two tenses in the past shows that difference. Okay, let's see. On n'avait pas très faim et on n'a pas mangé tout de suite. Oh wait, no, we're gonna go with this one first. Il était 7h30. Okay, I'm gonna put this in blue. Quand je suis arrivée au restaurant. So we see the same kind of usage of imparfait and passé composé. So in this case, the part of the sentence that begins with quand, like when, is put in the second half of the sentence, and the part describing the time is in the first part of the sentence. So il était 7h30. So it was 7:30. Even though 7:30 is a specific point in time, I think l'imparfait in this case is kind of setting the scene, giving the details of a story. So I could see why someone would want to choose passé composé, but I think when you're telling time, or especially talking about weather, the imparfait would work better here. Okay, quand je suis arrivée au restaurant. So she arrived at one moment. She couldn't arrive for a long period of time. Okay, on avait pas très faim et on n'a pas mangé tout de suite. Okay, so we can highlight those in their colors too. Okay, we weren't very hungry. On n'avait pas très faim. Oh, again, kind of setting the scene, telling the story. Hunger can last for some time, or not in this case. Et on n'a pas mangé tout de suite. Okay, so the event of eating hadn't even taken place yet. So I think it makes sense to talk about that in passé composé as a single event. Et le repas était, so the meal lasted for some time, était délicieux et j'ai bien mangé. So passé composé for the act of eating, because you eat starting at one point. It doesn't take a really majorly long period of time to do that, and you complete it at some point. So it makes sense to use passé composé in that case. Okay, and just a few more activities in her day. Après le repas, nous sommes partis. So partir is in passé composé here. Parce que nous étions fatigués. Okay, so we were tired. Being tired lasts for some time. It again kind of describes the personal feelings of the people in the situation. It's something that endures for some time. And leaving the restaurant is something that happens at one moment, just like je suis arrivé, nous sommes partis. And because it is conjugated with être, notice that we have an S on the end of parti to agree with nous sommes. Okay. Quand je suis rentrée chez moi, il était environ 10 heures. Okay. Quand je suis rentrée, so she entered her place, she returned to her place at one moment. It took a quick amount of time to get through the door. Il était, okay, so there we can definitely use imparfait, environ 10 heures. Okay, and when we're telling time in the past, it's very often or very common that you're going to use imparfait. And finally, finalement, enfin, le lendemain, c'était dimanche et je suis restée au lit jusqu'à 10 heures. So the next day, it was Sunday et je suis restée au lit jusqu'à 10 heures. Okay, so it was Sunday, kind of describing, setting the scene once again. So when we're talking about days of the week, talking about telling time, talking about the weather, those would all be really common verbs to use in the imparfait form. Okay, je suis restée au lit jusqu'à 10 heures. Even though it seems like you're going to be staying in bed for some time, you wouldn't, do it in an instant. It might be a few hours that you would stay in your bed. It's still an event that starts and gets completed in the past. It's almost like something that you've accomplished, even though sleeping late might not feel that way. But in a sense it is. So she accomplished something by staying in her bed until 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so I think this lesson was helpful not only to introduce some new verbs and to look at the conjugations of those verbs, but also to do some comparison between passé composé and imparfait. It's not an easy distinction for English learners of French, because we don't have exactly the same division of time in our language. We express those kind of continuous past events in different ways than French does. But it's always interesting, I think, to learn about how other languages divide up time, how another language perceives the world. And we learn from that, right? It broadens our own perspective. Okay, so that's it for video 5. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you for the next one. Au revoir!